Polish composer Frédéric Chopin's two sets of Etudes for solo piano, Opus 10 and 25. It's not hyperbole to say that they're the most important collection and influential collection of Etudes ever published for the instrument, and had a huge impact on later composers like Debussy, like Liszt, even Brahms, even someone as far-flung as Bela Bartok. So Chopin, amazingly, was essentially self-taught as a piano player, which literally seems completely impossible considering he invented a whole new style of technique that is essentially still the one we use 200 years later to play the instrument. But he was just an incredibly gifted musical genius from a very early age. All of his teachers in Warsaw talk about the fact that anytime they tried to introduce a subject to him or a topic to him, he basically seemed to already intuitively just understand it and know it. So Chopin actually composed these etudes when he was, many of them, or at least started them, when he was still a teenager in Poland. This is before he leaves. Chopin's life was tragic in many respects. Perhaps the way it was most tragic is he left Poland at the age of 20 to pursue a concert career as a virtuoso pianist. And while he was away in Vienna, there was an uprising against the Russian Tsar, who essentially ruled the country of Poland by by around 1830. The revolt featured many of Chopin's friends and associates, and so when it was brutally crushed, Chopin knew that it was totally unsafe for him to return to his homeland for fear that he would come under the thumb of the Russian Tsar. And so he spent some very unhappy time in Germany, and then finally arrived at his adopted home, Paris, which he instantly loved and which also instantly loved him. So Chopin ultimately publishes his etudes once he gets to Paris. So each one of these etudes is in the tradition really of what we would call like the 19th century conservatory etude. Each of them picks essentially one technical problem for the performer and then forces the performer to really grapple with it over the course of a relatively short piece, usually 3 to 6 minutes long. So this particular etude I'm talking about now, in E-flat minor from Opus 10, number 6, this piece really emphasizes playing melody and accompaniment in the same hand together at the same time. So it's a piece that is actually much harder to perform and interpret than it actually even sounds. Chopin was a huge snob. He was a musical genius, but he would have been really probably a very difficult hang most of the time. He had a uniformly low opinion of most of his musical contemporaries. This includes Liszt and Schumann and Mendelssohn and Berlioz. They all thought he was a miracle come down from earth, but he was a lot less impressed with their music. There were two strains of music that he absolutely loved, though, and that was one, the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, which he encountered as a child in Poland, and the other, which he mainly encountered in Paris, was the tradition of bel canto opera, Italian opera. These are composers like Bellini and Donizetti, and this very, very beautiful natural singing style that could sometimes also become highly ornamented. And so in this particular etude, Chopin marries his love of Bach and his love of bel canto opera. The melody, of course, comes from the opera, and the kind of sinewy, constantly turning back in on itself chromatic accompaniment. This is something that Bach would have loved. It's almost like it comes out of what musicologists call Affektenlehre, or the doctrine of the affections. It's a tried and true musical signifier to designate emotional anguish, and this piece is certainly all about emotional anguish. This piece also demonstrates another interesting element of Chopin's music, in that Chopin likes to bleed genres a lot of the time. So he might call a piece an etude, but it could also be a waltz, or it could be a nocturne, and that's the case with this one. It essentially is just a very, very beautiful nocturne, but it's different in the sense that nocturnes are Chopin's official nocturnes generally tend to be highly sectional. This is sectional, but the figuration persists throughout the entire piece. That's the challenge of the etude genre. And so to get all together, it sounds like this. And he gives another shout out to Bach at the very end of the piece. So it was very common practice in the Baroque period in the early 18th century for pieces in minor mode to actually end in the major. And this is something that Bach does all the time, and this is something that Chopin does in this piece, and it has the effect in this piece of giving you just a little, like, teeny tiny glimpse of hope if you squint really, really hard. It sounds like this.